Oh boy. Alright. It's summertime. Summertime. Hey guys, today we're gonna talk about Logic. This is confusing to me as well. It's coming out of nowhere a little bit. I mean, Logic did recently drop an album called Vinyl Days. It was received pretty well, and I think it's an interesting time to look at his career. Although I probably would have gotten more views had I done this a couple years ago, but... So anyway, I think one of the biggest questions that surrounds Logic's career nowadays is always what happened to Logic? What happened to Logic? It seemed like, especially as the Maryland rapper accelerated to early retirement, his name became synonymous with like failure and cringe in hip hop. This got to the point where a lot of the people who supported him became jaded by his newer musical direction.
Like there's a certain bar, a measure of lyrical ability that you placed on yourself that you are no longer holding yourself to. This is extremely lazy the way he's rapping now. That's the main difference, is that your lines held more weight. You have bars, you have flow, but the substance overall just isn't there anymore. If you're a day one Jay-Z fan, he's not talking about the same shit, but who that person is has not changed. And I feel that Logic has changed. And that's not a bad thing because we all evolve and get older, but it's just not what I expected or anticipated for him to be at once he got to this point. The music is no longer for me. It no longer brings me in.
Now, I must confess, I used to be a fan of Logic. I know. A lot of people would think that's cringy. I'm not really embarrassed of my musical preferences, past or present. Everybody's got things that they're into for all types of reasons. There's no reason to shame somebody for liking what they like, including me, so... And my thoughts and feelings on Logic's topsy-turvy career have sort of changed a lot over time. There was a period where, even before people were hating on Logic as much as they were a few years ago, there was a period even before that where I kind of couldn't stand him myself. And that's, and as I get older and I kind of try to think about this negativity and these negative thoughts that I have about certain artists or have had about certain artists or that other people have. It's something that I reflect on because it has an ugly side, but at the same time, critique is necessary. Critically engaging with art is necessary. And also, a lot of the time, the discourse surrounding these critiqued artists falls short of the mark. Because everybody's so tightly wound in keeping their view and keeping the view that makes them comfortable emotionally, that they're not really interested in even listening that deeply and giving people the benefit of the doubt with thoughts that might contradict that. Anyway, I have perspective now, I think, and I feel inclined to analyze why I felt that way. I want to talk about what actually went wrong with Logic's career and his trajectory. And I want to talk about Vinyl Days and this new era of Logic in which people are receiving him quite well. Or at least a lot better than he was being received a few years ago. But there is a strong difference between early Logic, the one that I fell in love with, and later Logic, especially mid-career Logic. And of course, there's going to be differences. People change, people grow with time. But it felt like a lot of what was happening with him was a sort of recession, a sort of moving backwards. And I think with Logic, in his case, it was a lot of this strong, toxic centrism and optimism that was in his lyrics and in his music that grew as he put out more and more records. That I especially think as people sort of radicalized and separated and became more polarized over the few years that we've seen so much political ridiculousness, so much horrible trauma on social media and our TVs. It didn't really pair well, and there was also this visible internal struggle that Logic was displaying all the while. And I think a lot of that was based in, according to him, his traumatic childhood, his anxiety issues, and this very confusing and turbulent sense of self. Fame is hard. Parasocial relationships are hard. Music is hard. And the kind of hard criticism, the harsh, mean-spirited stuff people would say to Logic would be enough to put anybody in a bad place, to put anybody outside of themselves. Especially when you consider the unique struggles that he had in his life from childhood. It wasn't a recipe for a good outcome. But with Logic, I do think there was always talent. There's always been talent. And I think that there's something that's been visible since the beginning of his career. There's always been this passion for hip hop until apparently there wasn't. It's confusing. Let's take a look at the lyrics of Logic over time and examine through the eras what changed. And what he's doing differently on Vinyl Days, his new record, that has got a lot of people, even his most ardent critics, to show him some love and some positivity. Is he really so much better than he was a couple of years ago, and why? Finally, I'll explain to you why I'm so interested in talking about Logic, aside from whatever this intro was, and sort of break down what we can take from his career, what we can understand about ourselves and our art as artists through the perspective of Logic's career, and a hopefully thoughtful discussion on it. If that sounds good to you, then let's go. If not, then sorry. Okay, Young Sinatra, the old Logic. I got a freaking bottle this time. It says Contigo on it. I guess that's the brand name. Because I'm with you. I'm always with you. Llévame contigo. This video is actually about Romeo Santos. Passion is one of the biggest factors in an artist's music resonating with larger audiences, especially audiences that don't have very hard set taste in what they want from art. In the case of Logic, I think passion has probably been his most redeeming quality. During the Young Sinatra series, which was the series of mixtapes that he did while he was coming up, so to speak, Logic's passion was centered in two of his core interests, which he talked about a lot, which was his love for hip-hop and his desire to make it to the top. Now, when it comes to technique, Logic's strongest skill has always been his flow. When we talk about flow, we can define it as basically a person's rhythmic pocket on a beat when they're rapping. Logic always finds a tight pocket and then is also able to be smooth in that pocket. Hip-hop beats are very rigid a lot of the time. They're very hard. The drum tracks are hard and they're quantized, meaning that they're stuck to a sort of metronome so that they're always on beat. And so when you get a rapper who has a great flow, a lot of the time they make that even quantized beat come to life in a way because they're able to find all these different pockets and all these different inflections while still keeping this really interesting rhythmic cadence. Big words. So he'll do his kind of rapid fire and in and out flows and his smooth delivery, and then he'll accentuate it with a punchline. And his punchlines have never really been like super deep. He's never ever said stuff on records that have been like, wow, you gotta analyze that 5 times, like a Lupe Fiasco. But he'll have punchlines that instead are kind of easy to grab in the moment and still require a bit of cleverness. So it's something that you can definitely like see people reacting to very positively. It's a very crowd-pleasing style. You can tell that he crafted his skills as a rapper in settings that were live settings, in settings where you had a hip-hop crowd that was interested in hearing rapping, and he would come up and he would tailor his style to make people yell in the crowd and make people like be kind of in awe of this kind of flashy approach, which he was able to execute well. Like, it's not easy to do what Logic does, especially on like some of his good records, like Dead Presidents 3 from his Young Sinatra Undeniable mixtape. This is one of his best records in my opinion. He opens it with this line: so many people think that rap is a calling, stop it, just cease, got it, capiche, this is my house, you fuckers just lease, waiting on a record deal that's never coming like a priest. So there's some interesting rhyme stuff here, and Logic's rhyming has never been all that like complex either. He uses some internal rhymes in a way that's kind of slick and cool sounding. Cease, capiche, lease, priest, and then he'll use an occasional polysyllabic end rhyme. Stop it, just cease, got it, capiche. Got it, capiche isn't an end rhyme, that's another internal rhyme. It flows very well, and it accentuates that kind of flow heavy, flashy style. And then you get that punchline: waiting on a record deal that's never coming like a priest, because priests don't ejaculate. Most of his subject matter, kind of like I said before, was about loving hip-hop, the state of hip-hop, and coming up in hip-hop. And then also he would tie in his life experiences. A lot of the stuff that he dealt with growing up, a lot of the stuff, you know, sometimes with relationships, which was huge in sort of making a connection with the audience and showing that he had this vulnerability. His voice has always been pretty bright and slim. You know, like, I'm not going to do an impression. I'm not going to do an impression of Logic. If I were to do an impression of Logic, it would sound kind of, so many people think that rap is they calling, stop it, just cease, got it, capiche? You know, like his voice is kind of like narrow, right? Like slim and bright and youthful. And not only is that like a tonality that can be attracted to a lot of people, it's helpful for him to enunciate so clearly while he's saying things in a fast way. That's why he's always been pretty good at rapping fast. Because, you know, tips for anybody trying to get some sort of rapid fast verse out. You make the enunciation a lot easier when you're saying things quickly if you narrow your voice, whereas if you make your voice darker darker and larger and deeper, it's harder. And I think a lot of that is because the sound waves encompass more space, especially with the vowels, so the consonants are harder to hear. It also makes it harder for your voice to sort of connect with the consonants because a lot of the time it's coming from this very strong, open vowel sound. So when you listen to a lot of the best fast rappers, you basically can hear that their voice isn't that large. You know, there's some rappers that they have this very loud, booming voice, but the fast rappers usually can narrow their voice down to a little bit so they can, they can get those very quick rhymes off and it can sound fluid because they're not overtaking the sound that they're emitting with this loud, dark vowel. Just nerdy shit. That was just like 3 minutes of nerdness. I'm so sorry. But yeah, that lended to his rapping a lot. On songs like Growing Pains 2, he actually tempers this approach too, which shows a bit of versatility. He's always been pretty versatile as an artist, as a rapper. And on this record, you can see him sort of pull that back and make his voice a little darker and kind of allow himself to be a little behind the beat instead of being as tight as you would need to be when you're trying to rap fast. And instead, he does that because he's trying to sort of emphasize like I'm saying something really grand here. Everything ain't what it seems when you try to follow your dreams. First you saw the bigger picture, now you see behind the scenes. You thought everything was sweet, now you see that shit is mean. Got a taste, now you a fiend. Been into it since a teen. Wow, guys, like my Grammy's coming soon. These are the kinds of skills he brought forth that made a lot of hip-hop fans take notice. But he also had this very earnest energy. I think the voice is part of that. It's also the fact that he was very affable in the interviews that he would do and in his stage presence. Just a very charismatic, nice guy. Why am I holding like a invisible mic as I talk? Anyway, he had this motto, peace, love, and positivity. He would put that on everything, which really emphasized something that he was into, which was making sure that he had always put positive environments forward, and he was all about spreading love and da-da-da. And he also had very honest reflections of himself, his desires, his life experiences in his music. And that's why he was able to have like success business-wise in music, and he would sell out shows. He had a lot of fans even before he had a major label deal. He had a pretty big following and movement in Rat Pack. And a lot of that was because people really resonated with him.
My favorite thing is the whole energy he brings.
He literally came from the bottom, and like he recorded in his room, slept on a couch for a year, and then he got signed. It's the perfect dream.
His peace, love, and positivity.
Yeah, he's really diverse. Music for everyone.
His lyricism, it's just awesome. I like his lyrics too. It's so like intellectual.
He keeps it real. Not a lot of people out here doing real music that love the art form and everything. I think he's really into music. I appreciate that about him.
This is something you can observe in terms of his honesty in songs like Just a Man. It's time to dig up the past, so fuck it, let's unearth it. Like my childhood, living free like a child should. Remember the time I opened the bedroom door crack and saw my daddy smoking more crack. No food in my house, we just couldn't afford that. Mama drinking, sleeping until 5, but she always seemed to get up whenever men arrived. Feeling alone at like 11. I've loved, I've hated, I've cried, I've died inside. I've resurrected, but don't neglect that I've modified. I'm stronger, faster, better than ever before, and everything I've been through can honestly assure I'm no less, no more. That's why I'm just a man, homie. Flesh and blood, I'm just a man. But I don't think they understand, homie. I am perfect, I'm just a man. Y'all think I'm more than just a man. I'm reading a lot of Logic lyrics because I want you to get a sense of what he's putting forth in these verses, like in terms of his energy and in terms of his personality, especially in this song. Like he's saying these things that are very visceral, very dark things for him to experience, especially at such a young age. And then also connecting things with like talking to the audience, saying like, y'all think I'm more than just a man, but I'm not. Like, this kind of humility that he would put forward and this kindness that he would put forward. It was a big part of what helped him blow up. So let's talk about what happened as he blew up and after he blew up. Everybody, the middle epic of Logic. So after the Young Sinatra series catapulted Logic's popularity, he signed a deal with Def Jam and began releasing albums. There's always a difficulty in transitioning from making mixtapes and capturing that magic that you have on these successful mixtapes and then putting those into albums, because albums is a very different production and creation process, a very different marketing process. You have a lot more investment into albums. You have a lot more things that have to get done legally. That's off top. But also with albums, you're traditionally seeing a lot more of this focus on the artist showing their artistic vision and making something cohesive and making something thematic. It's supposed to be higher scale and filled with intentionality and focus, whereas a mixtape is allowed to be not focused. Part of the charm is that a mixtape is like a collection of raw ideas and demonstrations of a rapper's ability or their interests or whatever. So Logic's first album, Under Pressure, was actually very successful. It's well regarded, even to this day. It's seen as his best album by a lot of his fans, a lot of hip-hop fans in general that care about Logic. And this is in great part due to how much time and thought went into the idea of Under Pressure, because it's his first album. You have to understand he'd been coming with mixtapes for years, like once a year, and he'd been very consistent, but he was also planning an album along the way, thinking about things that he wanted to say, thinking about how he'd kick off his career, and he had all this hype at that point. So of course, with that first album, it was a great opportunity for him to put that forward and put forward something that he had a lot of time to work on. As the old saying goes, you have your whole life to come up with the songs for your first album, and then you have 6 months to come up with your second album. With Under Pressure, Logic focused primarily on telling about his past and his life, giving it this therapeutic and narrative feel and this arresting sort of storytelling feel as he describes the trauma he's undergone and the realities of his world growing up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, in West Deer Park. His parents battled addiction, his brother dealt drugs, his mother was quite racist towards him, he dealt with racism outside of that. The first real track of Under Pressure after the intro is Soul Food, and it's this culmination of this now developed style of Logic with his driven artistic direction and this idea of expressing his reality and connecting it with an audience. After his vision culminates with this album and he reaches a point of great success as a new star in rap with this gigantic loyal fan base, Logic's next few albums see him begin to explore different interests and directions. And this is kind of what leads to his downfall. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not experimenting and diversifying that specifically causes his artistry to decline. Every artist has to experiment, every artist has to change what they do over time, whether it's for worse or for better. That's not even something to knock. But it's the way that he chooses to go about it that I think leads to him becoming this maligned figure. The next year, Logic releases The Incredible True Story. Yes, the next year. And it's an album that has a lot of ambition, but in my opinion, it kind of just falls flat. I think it's a pretty good album, but it's an album that it shows a lot of these growing issues or these growing sort of limitations of what Logic was doing, because it was lacking the sort of focused writing and the compositional skill to execute this large vision that he had, which is something that he was trying to present to sort of justify and sort of put him forth as like being like the next big rapper, of being, you know, the top, putting himself to the top. You got to have that ambition to bring yourself to the top, right? It's just kind of like good in a lot of the ways that his previous work was. Like if you liked his previous mixtapes, you're pretty much gonna like The Incredible True Story, but that's kind of damning because it's supposed to be to some degree this departure for him, and yet the strongest parts about it are the things that he had already been doing. And even in that regard, some of that magic is kind of wearing off at that point. I think the overwork and sort of the separation of all these different ideas he had kind of hurt his ability to sort of focus on those key aspects of what he was, you know, really good at. He's rapping well in the flashy and passionate way, and his persona is still earnest. He's still versatile. There's this high budget production, you know, the budget's stepping up a little bit in terms of the beats and stuff. He's also adding this story element. Like he would always add stories to these albums with like voice actors on this one particularly.
HQ, this is Pilot Quentin Thomas. Haven't we met somewhere before?
The voice actors on The Incredible True Story, I don't think they added much in the first place, but I also don't know if their performances were even that good with the material, and it just kind of weighs the album down, in my opinion. I mean, the storytelling too, it just kind of feels a bit shallow. Like they're in a spaceship and they're going to travel to this planet called Paradise, and Japan and the US have united in the year 2023. It's like a lot, and like also like kind of like not really anything. To me. These fun, positive vibes of the album and his skill set as a rapper cover up for some of Logic's unoriginal music choices, which is something that he had really began to experience criticism for, even starting with Under Pressure. There were records that sounded like Kendrick. There are records on The Incredible True Story where it's like, oh, that's the drum track from Amazing. That's this from this. To the point where a lot of people were like, oh, he's biting, which is kind of unfair, but then also it kept happening, and so it was like, oh, wait a minute. And it also sees Logic sort of begin to manifest the corny branding that really kind of plagued his perception Now, the thing about this album, too, is that it showcases the drawbacks of the flashy rapping style that he had really manicured, because a lot of the writing is kind of non sequitur in this way. And that kind of non sequitur thing, remember, like with a mixtape, that's fine. Like lack of direction, just flossing, just showing off, that's fine. But then when you're trying to tell a narrative on an album that purportedly has like this strong message, and then you're still kind of doing this like non sequitur writing style. Like there's this particular moment where there's a skit, white people scene, which...
Did you just say another ship?
Yeah, that's what he said.
I really don't like that skit. And it's something about like avoiding some white people's ship that's cursed or something. And you'd have to listen to it to... Anyway, he follows that, which is like this piece of storytelling that we're supposed to invest our brains in while we're listening to this album, because it's part of the narrative. He follows that with the song Like Whoa. And Like Whoa starts with the verse, I've been feeling like a motherfucking postman sending letters to the people. Okay. All this knowledge that I got, I'm like an old man. Hold up, wait now, oh man. Let me back up in this bitch. I'm platinum in this bitch. I'm rapping in this bitch. I'm sorry. Like, there's this thing Logic does. It's just that there's this thing Logic does when he raps that it's very kind of like when you hear a rapper freestyle where like they have like these crutch lines and like they have these sort of non sequitur filler bars, which is just, that shouldn't be there, right? And I'm rapping in this bitch is just like so funny to me because like yeah, you are rapping in this bitch. That is true, you know? But what happened to the ship? Running the game, yeah, I've been lapping in this bitch. Okay, so now we're talking about your success as a rapper. You know it's alright. Fuck around and they all might look at a brother different. I've been at it all night. I think I said it, but I know I'm doing this for everybody going through it. Like, when you read that, what do you come away with? Like that song, you know, it's a pretty good song in terms of how it sounds. Like the beat is good, and he's flowing well. But it's like, what does this have to do with the ship? And there's a bunch of moments like that, or just like loose tie-ins, like, oh, we should listen to a record with an old school feel, and then the next record is a record with an old school feel, but it doesn't have any commentary about the. It's just tough. It's just tough. Again, like it's not horrible, but you can see the cracks forming. So then we get Everybody, which is kind of the beginning of the end. It's like the quintessential Logic release, for better or for worse. He was highly prolific. Like this is the next year he drops Everybody. Well, actually no, because in 2015 he drops The Incredible True Story. In 2016 he drops Bobby Tarantino, which is basically like a mixtape, but it's like kind of not a mixtape, and he's kind of just like rapping, trying out some like mainstream sounding stuff and doing some different things. That's like pretty cool. A lot of people like it. It's not really my thing because it feels a little bit unnecessary to me. It doesn't feel like it adds much, but I'm also just not a Logic fan at this point, and again, people got tastes. But again, like 2015, then 2016 is Bobby Tarantino, and then 2017 he drops Everybody, which is this project of a grand scale. The release pipeline for Everybody had this controversy before it drops, where the original title of the album was Africarian. To this point, we haven't talked about the biracial thing, and like, as a biracial person, I have to say I apologize for the way biracial people talk about being biracial, but it is really hard. We are very confused with our identity, especially because identity understanding is so shallow in the world we live in. The thing about Africarian as a title is that Aryan is not a term that has a great history. And at that point, Logic had been doing so many different bars about like, I'm black and I'm white, and I face racism from my parents, and I'm black and I'm white. And it became this thing of like, why is Logic talking about this so much? And it's corny when he does it, and da-da-da. And it's kind of a touchy thing, and I think people should talk about what they want to talk about. But I can also understand that biracial people, but specifically in this case Logic, you know, the way that he was going about talking about his biraciality wasn't always the most profound or the most engaging. It kind of felt like he would just say I'm biracial, then it would be it. Like, being biracial, it's been bad, it's been tough, you know? It's like when you get like immigrant poetry, you know what I mean? You know, the immigrant poem of like, you know, my mother cuts up mangoes for me and that's a sign of the blood, da da da. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, it's that thing of like talking about something that should be profound reflection on your identity, but just comes off as not only shallow, but also corny and vapid and repetitive. I think that that's the sort of feeling that people have with biracial talk from Logic, especially because it had been accumulating so long. So yeah, Africarian doesn't end up the title of the album. It does end up the title of the last song. And like, everybody, man. I think the Africarian name was like a sign of the problem to come, because it's really an album that tries to basically say like, everybody struggles. We all have to understand that being black and white, like there's so much struggle on both sides and da da da. It's like both sides of the album. It's like all lives matter, the album, in a lot of ways. He's not being conservative on the album. He's never been a conservative. He's never said right-wing shit outright. But it's this very centrist thing. And it's this very like peace, love, and positivity thing, which can be a great phrase when you're talking about your fans at your shows needing to take care of themselves and wanting to show love to them. And it's not necessarily great in the context of political commentary. This is really where like the cringe Logic lyric phenomenon pops up at first too. So everybody has these ambitious visions. It has this narrative again with voice acting again, this time with Neil deGrasse Tyson, which like talk about a guy that, yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson plays God in this album, cause like, get it, because he's like not religious, but like what if he was God? And he tells the protagonist of the album that he has to live the life of every single person basically in order to get into heaven. And this concept, if it sounds familiar to you, actually existed in a pretty well regarded book from like the mid or late 2000s called The Egg by Andy Weir, and there was some controversy about him biting that. And remember, by this point, people are already like, oh my god, Logic is so unoriginal. Logic takes these loops and these flows from these more popular rappers, and he doesn't say anything deep. And then when you're in this situation too, where it's like, oh, the concept of your whole album is like from something else, it's just like, there's a lot of room that can be given to an artist to do these things, especially because at the end of the day it's art and people are gonna, do things that have been done before. That's part of the deal. But like when shit accumulates that visibly, yeah, it's just tough. There's a lot of outros on this album, on records on this album, where Logic is speaking and like giving speeches, sometimes for minutes at a time, instead of just like rapping. It's like one of those things that people found really grating about the album, because it was like, there's even a passage I believe where Killer Mike, who is a pretty famous rapper, pretty acclaimed rapper, gets this feature and then he just talks. It's like, why would you get Killer Mike to just talk on the album? But again, it's like you can see this picture of an artist that is like filled with this vision and filled with this drive to create something huge, to create something far-reaching and diverse in a lot of ways. And so a lot of that ends up in just like Logic just passionately rambling about things on songs. It's tough. I keep saying it's tough because like I don't know what else to say. And remember when I talked about the non sequitur rhyming style from the mixtapes, it being a good thing, and then with the context of the incredible true story, it doesn't work as well. Now take that and take it into this context where it's an album about a person trying to get into heaven ostensibly by living everybody's life, and it's supposed to be this grand social political commentary, and then you still have like non sequitur, like I'm killing it, I'm killing the beat, like But I think the bigger problem is visible in a song like America, which like, okay, here we go. It's a song called America. This is Everybody, the album, and it's about everybody. It's about struggle. It's about social political themes. And here's a song called America. The song even features Chuck D and Black Thought, two of the most legendary rappers of all time, who each have bodies of work with a lot of political and social commentary that is revered. So it's like, damn, okay. And then Logic raps, George Bush don't care about black people. 2017 and Donald Trump is the sequel. So shit, I'll say what Kanye want. Remember, this is the time period where Kanye was doing the MAGA thing. And wake the fuck up and give the people what they want. Man, it's all love, but the youth is confused. Your music is 2020, but them political views is blurred. I ain't trying to leave your name slurred, because honestly, I idolize you on everything, my word. But I gotta say what need be said, because I ain't fucking with that hat with the colors that's white and red. Wait, it's like... Like, aside from, like, you can kind of already feel like, oh, that line is kind of corny, and the colors that's white and red because MAGA hats, right? And, like, you can kind of already see the sort of simplicity of the lyrics in a way that kind of feels basic, right? But it's also, like, the rap equivalent of, like, somebody's aunt saying something like, you know, I don't want to be mean, but people littering, that's just like not cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's got the bite and the political focus of like somebody's teacher being like, wow, it's really sad how some people are poor in this country. It's nothing, like it's so vapid. You're gonna go at Kanye in a sort of way where you're criticizing him, and I get that you don't want to disrespect him because you want to preserve his humanity and you respect him as an artist and you think he has good intentions, but you can't just write it like that. You can't just write, sorry Kanye, I don't want to be mean, your music is great, but like the MAGA hat is not cool. Like, that's like 8 bars that you took to do that. Like 12 bars you took to talk about Kanye in that very basic, easy breezy sort of way. What does that do? That's the thing. Logic, like the commitment sometimes with the writing, it just commit, like say something and then say something sharply and then say something like that we haven't heard before. You know, if you're gonna go on a record, especially something like this where it's supposed to be momentous and supposed to be this big political commentary, and you're gonna be, then he says, don't burn down the mom and pop shop. I'm just as angry another person got shot. Don't be angry at the color of their skin. Just be happy that as a people we could begin again. And I don't know what that means. And I'm gonna tell you what I need right now. I'm gonna tell you what we all need. I need my people of color. Don't run from Trump, run against him. Like, especially in 2022, like, man, 2017 wasn't that long ago, but in 2022, I can't even imagine, like, Kamala Harris is more politically incisive in her tweets than Logic was in this verse on a song called America with Black Thought and Chuck D on it. All this stuff too about like nonviolence, right? That's kind of how it ends up being this All Lives Matter album, and there's other things we'll go over in a sec. It covers itself in this positivity and this ambition to unite people, but it fails to show attention to detail in terms of its understandings of politics and race, and in terms of its willingness to be incisive, and its willingness to be raw, and its willingness to say something that's unique and powerful. It's always falling short in the name of, well, I don't want to be mean, well, I think people should get along. And like, that in and of itself is not some moderate thing. It's an extreme problem in a lot of cases, because if you think about what movements have to be in order for them to be successful, to be for the people, they have to entail a level of violence in response to violence. People are being violently oppressed in the United States. And so to be like, don't protest violently, and to be like, don't burn down the mom and pop, like placing this blame on the victim, placing this negative shadow over people really just doing what's necessary, which sometimes includes casualties, but like how many casualties are there of the system that already exists? A very pertinent example. Mexico this past year had significant protests that included clashes with police and fire and people being injured in response to a law being passed that really threatened abortion rights in Mexico. And that helped pressure the ostensibly progressive government and the Supreme Court of Mexico into protecting abortion rights. I mean, how many times have we seen it? How many times have we seen nonviolent protests and just run against Trump, just run for office, like turn into nothing? Like, that's a core thing that something like Everybody just glosses over. There's a very successful song on Everybody, a big pop single, 1-800-273-8255. That number is actually the suicide line number in the United States, which is important for you to know. And I think it's actually a good song. It's a good pop song. It's about mental health. It's about suicide. It features Alicia Cara and Khalid. It's catchy, but it's also allowing itself to be a little raw and tempered at the same time, because it's a pop song. So it's accessible at the same time. But the thing about that song too is that it's polarizing. It's very polarizing, especially and particularly because of the now infamous ad-lib that happens about 20 times in the song, which is Logic yelling, "Who can relate? Woo!" Like, there's the earnestness, there's the energy again. And on one hand, that signature enthusiasm and energy that Logic brings helps hook the song, and it helps add energy to it and show his sincere desire to reach out to people. Like, yeah, who can relate? But it's also like so easy to read that as just pandering and cynical. Like literally a person asking you, who can relate to this song that I'm writing? Somebody relate. Woo! Like, we're making this song. Woo! It's so easy to be cynical about that. I can totally understand people being like completely put off by that.
Oh man. Did Logic find the quickest possible way to show that he didn't have a clue what he was talking about? All my ladies with suicidal depression say, hey!
At the same time, I can understand people being like, that song saved my life. So I give it the props, but I also think it's another example, something that will be relevant later too, of Logic falling short because of his desire to like try different things in a way that's like very gingerly, like very sort of limp-wristed almost, like, oh, like who can relate? Woo! You know, like, what? Anyway, so Logic's follow-up projects to Everybody got mixed reception at best. There was Bobby Tarantino 2 the next year, and that one felt unnecessary to a lot of people. Some people liked it, some people didn't. Young Sinatra 4, YSIV, the next year felt like this attempt to return back to his roots. Mixed reception, mixed results. And then there was Supermarket, which, wow, I mean, like, I don't want to talk about Supermarket too much. This video is already long enough, but it was definitely not well received. I think it was another one of these things where he was just attempting to try this style. In this case, like, he was trying to make a soundtrack album. He was trying to try rock sounds and stuff. And it didn't go over well because it just feels like when Logic tries something, he tries to get into a bag, but he only dips his toe in and then asks everybody if it's okay. Eventually, especially when you're supposed to be also at the same time seen as this amazing, versatile person, like you're presenting yourself as that, it's very easy for that to be grating, you know? And then there was Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which was it. That was it. That was the album that Logic received a huge amount of flack for. A lot of it was because the lyrics were just completely obsessed with social media. The cover is him staring at a phone and deteriorating. And a lot of the lyrics were shallow. It was just really the worst we'd seen Logic. There were these vapid and shallow bars that, you know, like, I listen to party rappers. I listen to drill rappers. I listen to 21 Savage. Like, there's something to be said about rap records that are a little shallow, whatever. It's fun for what it is, but for Logic to be doing it when that's not his bag, and when he's very much been like, I'm a lyricist, I'm not gonna go back on my desire to be meaningful and da-da-da, and then to write verses like this on Icy, rap and get money, said rap and get money, motherfucker, ain't this shit funny? Money funny. Don't do it for money, but if it come down to the money, I got a lot, like a lot more than I need. I got children to feed, I got places to be, I got bitches to fuck, let me see your ID. Nah, I'm just playing, I'm playing, you know that I'm playing, don't know what I'm saying, no. Like, yeah, I can tell you don't know what you're saying, bro. Like, what? Recently, Logic has said that this album was essentially a satirical social experiment. Whether you believe that or not, and I think there's a degree to which that's true. I think there's a degree to which Logic was really just like doing a lot of things on these records where he was just playing around and trying to say things that were shallow, trying to give his interpretation of shallowness because he was very frustrated with people's perceptions of him, and he felt like him attempting to be deep and satisfy people wasn't working, and then he was like, oh, what do you just want me to do this and that. At the same time, it's hard to stomach. It doesn't justify an album being bad, and so much of the album is dealing with him basically holding his mental health over the audience's head. On the title track, they always compare me to others and try to hit me up against all my brothers. Now, why do you think so many rappers be overdosing at the crib? Because people just won't let them live, and the public is constantly thinking they know them, but nobody knowing what's going on inside, and they wonder why we all hide shit. Like, aside from the simplicity, like, yikes. As Dead in Hip Hop said in their interview.
It's like, bro, stop.
Yeah, I didn't
man,
really
come
care
on,
for that
dog.
much.
Like,
So I'm saying that shit's weak.
they're not
No.
overdosing their crib because people are saying that they sound like Drake, Kendrick. Who else do they sound like? Jid. That's not why they're overdosing.
And the
dude.
timing of that with what happened with Mac Miller, I don't know if he put that in there because
insensitive
of that.
as fuck, yes.
Yeah, I wasn't rocking with
It was
that.
tacky.
I don't know what his intentions were behind that, or
To make people feel sorry for him.
Right, to try to say that their pain is also your pain, and if you don't be nice to him, then that's going to be him, eventually, or at some point, or could be. It's just like, nah, man, that ain't it.
No, it's not. And I don't think anybody wants anything negative to happen to Logic.
Absolutely not.
But I think putting that kind of shit out there in the atmosphere is not good for you, your career, or anything else.
And then to make matters worse, there's this French Montana record that Logic is on around the same time, where he has this line, 1-800 then I kill the pussy. Who can relate? Of course, which is a reference to the 1-800 record on which he says, who can relate? And then he decides to get on a strip club record and joke about it and say, I killed the pussy. This is where Logic went from being like, oh, like he's corny, he's well-intentioned, but he's corny, he's not that good as a rapper, whatever, to like, yikes. If anybody needed a reason to believe that all the positivity thing that Logic was doing and all the good-natured response he was getting was like a front and was like undeserved, and that he'd been a shallow and exploitative person the whole time, or at least became one, lines like those, that's evidence. At that point, even longtime fans were turning on him. More than anything though, it felt like Logic during this time period was just overwhelmed by the criticism he was receiving, despite how much work he was putting in, how ambitious and positive he was. He was a workaholic. He grinded way too much, and he was constantly trying to put out positive messages and be ambitious, and it was constantly leading to more and more negative response, which I think he really struggled to understand. And yeah, it doesn't justify that kind of stuff at all, to be honest. Like, those lines are, yeah, but I think that when you have this person that's in the limelight trying to succeed, trying to put stuff out, their brain gets disoriented a lot of the time in these situations, and they end up becoming somebody that they're not, or becoming somebody that they shouldn't be, doing things that they shouldn't do, in a way to lash out or to experiment or to try to figure out something, to the point where he was just contradicting himself and making himself look really bad. And that's when he decided he was done. With the release of his apparent last album, No Pressure, 2 years ago, which was a nod to his well-liked first album, Logic announced his retirement, and he spoke about it in a tear-filled live stream.
If I was to give a speech to end all of this, thank you to the industry for shitting on me every step of the way because you only made me stronger. Thank you to every single fan that showed support and loved me over the years. Thank you to every publication that isn't a fuckboy and writes about real shit and not gossip and bullshit. Thank you to Nick Huff. Thank you to the Rat Pack. Thank you for making me a better person. And I just want to say I'm really happy that I don't give a shit. And that I can go fish and shoot guns and wipe my son's ass, you know. And 6, thank you for always believing in me and trusting me and giving me your best shit, because fuck everyone else. I want to thank Kendrick, because he doesn't know how much he was there for me, and Cole and Drake, fucking ASAP and Ferg. There's too many people, man. I thank you all. I love you all. I bid you farewell. And as always, I'm obediently yours. I won't be on the internet for the first time in my career because it hurts me. And every time I released an album, I just wanted to be loved. And this time I don't check the internet because I finally love myself. So, thank you so much. And as always, peace, love, and positivity. I love you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you in other endeavors. I am off to be a good father. Thank you.
No Pressure was fairly well received, but it was hardly a final album. Truthfully, I think Logic just needed a lot of space. He needed to let go of the issues he was harboring. He needed to reevaluate what he was doing. He followed No Pressure with another edition of Bobby Tarantino, and then this year in 2022, he dropped Vinyl Days, which ensures that he's dropped a body of work every year since 2010. Think about that. With Vinyl Days, it seems like Logic has finally turned around some of the negative public perception he's amassed over the years, and even some of his biggest skeptics have paid respects to it.
I also feel like for a casual Logic fan or a guy like me who's not really into the stuff that he's been releasing in the last few years, here it just feels like, you know what, I don't have anything to prove. I'm not trying to be the best rapper, and I'm glad I've come away with that understanding after listening to this album, because if he doesn't want to be the best rapper and he just wants to make music and he just wants to be a guy who's near hip hop, even if he is retired or not retired, or I don't even know what the status is anymore. I feel like that's a much healthier, less toxic place for him to be in.
But what is it exactly that Logic did on this new album that caused such a positive reception? Did he get some of that fire and some of that genuineness back from his early days? Did he repent for his sins? I think one of the key takeaways of Vinyl Days is that Logic, for one, is getting better as a rapper again. He cares about getting better as a rapper again. He's improving his writing. He's allowing for more complex rhymes and lyrical ideas. And he's also honing into some more honest songwriting themes. Instead of constantly trying to scale his music up and accomplish these lofty goals and put himself in this position where he's expecting a reception and then getting disappointed by it, it's more like on Vinyl Days, he's finding strength and just focusing on making music, putting some stuff out, trying some stuff, and doing it in a way where he kind of knows what to expect and what to expect of himself. We do get this repeat of the "why you think rappers overdose at the crib" thing on Breath Control. I'm just gonna ignore that. I like the track Quasi, which is a focused short track where he's basically begging Madlib to do records as Quasimodo, his rap alter ego again, which is something any hip-hop head can get behind. I certainly can. Madlib, my man, come the fuck back, damn. Show the people that you understand what I'm saying. Quasimodo flow, toe-to-toe with any spitter. Hip-hop needs you in this company, the Black John Ritter. In the lab, you said people don't want to hear my shit. I should smack you, brother. They revere that shit. Come back, run it back, neutralize them like Men in Black. From Stone's Throw to Madlib Invasion, ask any fan on the street. They'll say your shit is amazing. The GOAT, a legend, a god amongst men. Greatest producer alive, number 1 out of the 10. Egon would say that shit will probably make you feel uncomfortable, don't it? But it might bring you back, won't it? Okay, like not there's nothing he's doing there that's like Kendrick Lamar, like super dense stuff, but like doesn't that read so much better than some of the stuff I was reading before? Like there's a theme, there's a message, there's something that he's cohesively doing. There's even like internal rhymes where it works, Quasimodo flow, toe to toe, right? Like there's a bunch of stuff there. And what an interesting theme for a song. Just a message to another artist to get back into doing a particular thing as a fan. Like, that's cool. Now see how much more clever and focused his rhyming is on a track like Vinyl Days, which is produced by the legendary DJ Premier. He always gets these crazy features. You mad as fuck, all you see is ride like a conservative. All the critics do is talk, I'm really not concerned with it. Hell is hot and we can make your residency permanent. Several shots, they tying up your body with a tourniquet. Let it rock, it's obvious that he don't know who turn it is. Keep my circle tight knit cause people move deceitful. Money and greed will expose you to the root of evil. Already proved myself, not worry about who's my equal. Far from an anti-vaxxer, but I move the needle. Like, I was listening to that shit like, hey, oh shit, Logic. This is some of the best rapping Logic's ever done. Like, far from an anti-vaxxer, but I move the needle. You get a little line, that's like a line where he's saying something about his political beliefs and making a clever line about moving the needle, and then hell is hot, residency permanent, several shots, let it, like the internal rhymes are like on a different level here. Overall, I hope Logic is healing and finding that humble confidence that he's putting forth on Vinyl Days. He's always had skills, and he's always had, at least professed to have, noble intentions, though he's not always been great at showing it. But ultimately, he's a human being. He deserves to be treated like a human being. And he's been under a lot of tremendous pressure and tremendous trauma, and yet he's still here doing his thing, and that's cool. Whether or not I'm a fan, whether or not I trust him after saying some of that stuff is different. But like, look, he's a human being and he's trying, and he's moving in a healthier direction. You can't hate that. Here's the thing though. Why am I talking about Logic? What can we learn from Logic's story as artists and as human beings? I think the two central problems that plagued Logic's career and his growth as an artist are inherent societal responses to capitalism, moderate extremism, and toxic positivity. With regards to moderate extremism, I mean by this the insistence on moderation and centrism to a degree that is ironically inherently extreme, but more importantly to a point that is often very toxic and very problematic. We are all familiar with the social idea, the saying that you can't please everybody. And this advice is helpful to all artists, public figures, everyday people, everybody. But the idea of moderate extremism is something more socio-political. I sourced this idea from a piece from 2003 by an anonymous writer named Morpheus entitled "The Moderate as Extremist." In the piece, Morpheus outlines how popular convention dictates that extremism is something inherently bad and violent, but in reality, it is a toxic idea that overlooks the extremist reality of the belief that the middle of the road is always the superior position. They write, Not everything should be in moderation. We should not have rape in moderation. We should not have genocide in moderation. We should not have slavery or concentration camps or war crimes or sexism or racism in moderation. These things should be completely abolished. To have them in moderation, as the middle of the road position would have it, is unethical. Moderates are actually extremists, and far worse than many of the extremists they denounce. The idea that one should always take the middle of the road position on all issues is itself quite extreme. Aside from how on the nose that is when it comes to the lyrics on everybody, how does this idea apply to the rapper Logic? For one, Logic's themes, while often kind of inspiring and interesting, lead to a very moderate dogmatic conclusions. Be nice to people. Spread love, not hate. This is particularly present in Everybody. Its very title indicates its struggle. It's an album that's meant to be about everybody, that's meant to be about coming together in the moderate, centrist, peaceful way, and that's about unity. But the goal is not only so lofty to be practically realized in like a few months making an album, it's also this inherently contradictory goal. As you can see with the earlier point about nonviolent protest, that's a contradiction. You're facing a situation where you're being faced with violence. So you're not supposed to be blamed for the violence that you do, in response defending yourself against violence. But inherently telling protesters you should only protest peacefully and you shouldn't be mean to people who are is inherently like extremist. You're inherently saying that people shouldn't have as much rights as the people oppressing them. Now, one big thing is Logic talking about how he's experienced racism from both sides. And he's a person who's black and white. He's part black, part white, right? With this, he's written lyrics that seem to discuss the concept of white privilege being relevant to his experience. This is on Everybody, the song Everybody. But he was born with the white privilege, man. What the fuck is that? White people told me as a child, as a little boy playing with his toys, I should be ashamed to be black. And some black people look ashamed when I rap, like my great granddaddy didn't take a whip to the back. Now, here's the thing about these lyrics, and I'm going to try to talk about this in a way that is becoming of my position, because I'm not black. I am biracial, and I am Dominican, mostly. I'm actually, both my parents are from the Dominican Republic. My mom is fully Dominican. She is of mixed racial descent, but she is fully Dominican, ethnically, nationally, and that means that she is biracial as well. She's black and white. My dad is also biracial. He's Chinese and white. And then there's some Taino blood in there, You wouldn't know that if you looked at me, because if you look at me, I look like Asian, maybe mixed race Asian. My last name, as shown in my channel name, is Sang. What does this mean? It means I'm phenotypically Asian. And race is based in phenotype. It is based in phenotype because race isn't real. It's a fake science. It is something that was constructed specifically so that racism could exist. Look up the history of racism, especially in the United States. The history of these ideas of mongoloids and caucasoids. These were ideas that were supposed to be scientific, but what they were was just BS that people made up to say certain people that look a certain way are inherently inferior. So that construct is created by people who branded themselves the Caucasoids, later the whites, and said that those people who look white, who have the pale skin and certain features, are the best, nicest, smartest people. That is what race is. You don't get to say, I am actually this race, when your phenotype is saying something different. Now, when you look at Logic, some people might think, well, actually, he does look kind of black. Like, he does look mixed race. A lot of people might say he's white. I'm not here to tell him what he's entitled to say, what he's entitled to do, whether or not he's entitled to call himself a black person. That's somebody else's conversation to have. What I'm here to say is that this whole thing of white people and black people are so racist towards each other. No, many black people hold prejudice against different groups of people, including white people. But whiteness isn't real. It's not an ethnicity. Whiteness is entirely made up so that people from all these different backgrounds in Europe could say that they were superior when they were among people who weren't from Europe. What does this mean? It means that a white person being racist towards a black person is not the same thing as a black person being racist towards a white person. It doesn't mean that a black person can't be harmfully prejudiced against white people, but the context is entirely different, and more importantly, the literal action is different, because black people have been branded black as a specific tool to oppress them, whereas white people have been branded white as a specific tool to maintain their supremacy in the hegemony, to maintain their lead in the world. There's way more political power in a white person saying negative racist things about black people than there is in a black person saying negative prejudiced things against white people. Whether you call it racism or not, whether you can say black people are racist towards white people, or whether you don't think that that constitutes racism, because a lot of people define racism as an exertion of political power, there's just not political power there because black people are not at the head of the hegemony. They are specifically thrown at the bottom of the hegemony. You're talking about a mechanism through which people are oppressed versus somebody being prejudiced towards somebody who looks a certain way. It's different. And if you don't have that understanding of race, yeah, you might look at those things as being the same because you haven't taken time to listen to what history is telling you. You haven't taken time to notice the differences in a white person experiencing prejudice versus a black person experiencing prejudice. A white person experiencing prejudice is, I didn't get to hang out with this group of people, or they were really mean to me on the internet. A black person being subject to prejudice is being killed by a police officer. I know a lot of people are going to give me crap for that if they end up watching this long ass video to this point anyway. And I just feel like even if you disagree with me, the point is more so that this is a very shallow view of how to talk about race and how to talk about his experience. And it's something that it's his experience. I'm not invalidating his feelings. I'm not invalidating the hurt that he felt at the hands of both of his parents. But what I think is a problem is then sitting here and saying, well, both sides need to come together. Both sides are racist. Both sides are causing problems. No, if you are abusing me, you are the problem. If you are systemically oppressing me to the point where I can't go somewhere where there's a bunch of cops and not fear for my life, that's the problem. The problem isn't me also being mean to you sometimes. Like, that's a separate thing. Like, that's not on the same scale as a political issue. That is a personal problem. What that does specifically is it gives people, usually white people, but often people from all races, the justification to bash black people and other marginalized people in different situations for criticizing the actions of white people or for defending themselves against them, sometimes using violent means, because it's this moderate position. Both sides can be bad. We should just come together and love each other. Well, think about the moderate as extremist point, right? If the conversation is one person saying, we need slavery, and the other person saying, we should not ever have slavery, the moderate position is, maybe we should have some slavery. Does that sound reasonable? Does that sound moderate? Likewise, if the problem is white supremacy, meaning white people systemically, violently oppressing black people, if you have white supremacy on one end, and if you have black people are mean to white people on the other end, the moderate position being, oh, well, both people need to step up. No, on one hand, you have an abusive, all-encompassing problem. That is the problem. The reasonable solution is to end that problem. And then also, yeah, sure, preach positivity, preach for people to stop being mean. Fine, but you can't sit here and then try to make this album, try to make this piece of art, try to make this statement of everybody has to come together. That's the problem with the world. No, it's not. The problem isn't rich people take all the money from poor people, and also poor people need to be better with their money. Like, no, if poor people weren't poor, maybe they wouldn't have so many issues with their money. Maybe that's the problem. You see how this moderate thing causes so many ideological issues, and it causes things to happen like Logic fans to like be indoctrinated a certain way. It causes, yeah, a lot of stuff. It's plagued Logic's music for years, and although it's coming from this understandable place of him navigating the trauma and the segregation he's faced from an early age, it is ultimately what caused him to ironically become so polarizing. And on a new song like Therapy Music, where Logic says people laughed at him just for talking about mental health, which is true to some extent, it's this kind of rush to point out this extreme behavior, the violent behavior that's always used to brush over humanist arguments. In Logic's case, is that, oh, his mental health themes, they were, people were just being mean, people were not understanding, people were saying that I was the F word for talking about mental health. Yeah, maybe some people were doing that. That sucks, but also there were problems with it, and you have just equated the issue of people criticizing the legitimate problems with your mental health talk with people just being completely flippant and hating you for talking about mental health. Like, that kind of pushing to the side of legitimate criticism is very much a sign of a lack of accountability. And that all connects to the idea of toxic positivity, which has become common parlance nowadays to describe a common social mentality of shunning critiques and complaints about society as being negative and glorifying like a positive mentality as being necessary for success. Meaning like, don't say that the world is cruel. You know what? You're being negative. You know what? You have air to breathe. Like, thanks. As Eve Smith wrote years ago for Naked Capitalism, My big objection to this belief in this sunniness as a form of exercise is that it's a form of censorship. People try to shut those who convey unpleasant truths down by claiming they undermine creativity, or as Lambert likes to put it, following Vast Left, are harshing my mellow. And that sort of refusal to allow certain topics into conversation because they might be upsetting makes critical thinking and analysis impossible. It's not really a surprise that Logic and Gary Vee have been chummy, have been buddy-buddy in the past, because the latter figure, right, who has been increasingly criticized by people who see him as a proprietor and a leader of hustle culture, which is extremely toxic, and who preaches that anyone can be rich if they work hard enough, which is not true, ultimately aligns with the kind of stay positive, keep grinding mentality that Logic had basically been putting on. Even though lines from Growing Pains 2, like when Logic says, y'all grind till like 3 in the morning, I grind till the sun up, like that shows this self-congratulatory attitude towards Logic's unhealthy workaholism. Even though like I might be like, yeah, y'all grind till like 3 in the morning, I grind till the sun up, like it is inspiring, it is great to be focused and to dedicate a lot of work to something you're passionate about. But it's also like toxic, right? Like, it's perfectly fine to grind till 3 in the morning. In fact, you probably shouldn't grind that long. And this is a necessary part of his journey, really, to escaping poverty and trauma. But you have to examine it critically. You have to sit there and be able to say, hey, Logic, you shouldn't have had to work that hard. If you wouldn't have had to work that hard, if you wouldn't have had to fight so hard against your demons and do all these things just to get in a position where you could take care of yourself and live a comfortable life, maybe you could have done more stuff in your life. Maybe you could have had a lot more fun and had a lot less issues, because you wouldn't have had to expend all this time and traumatize yourself often just to try to live. Now, we can talk about the music industry fetishizing overwork and poverty another time. It's still inspiring to me to see a rapper like Logic try to create positive environments at his shows and his appearances, to try to unite people, to work at every goal that he desires, every style he wants to try. But the depression and the anxiety and the harmful attitudes that he has shown and talked about in his career shows that, yeah, all that grinding really doesn't do everything at the end of the day. And that's not even to say like, oh, I'm gonna exactly explain to you how he had these mental health issues. It's me sitting here saying like, wow, like this commodity fetishism and this obsession with succeeding is really allowing us to overlook everything that is troubling us. With a look at the lyrics of Logic, that's kind of what we see. He had all this fame, he had all this success, he had all these fans, and yet he drove himself insane because of all this extremely toxic stuff he was exposed to. And instead of having the tools to be able to say, this is toxic, this is not toxic, this is what I should work on, this is what I shouldn't work on, he was instead constantly defensive, he was constantly confused, he was constantly struggling, and then it allowed him to instead do things out of anger or out of confusion that were harmful, with particularly the lyrics that he said that I would say are harmful. Now, what makes Vinyl Days stronger thematically for Logic, even though some of that is still there, is that regardless of whether he's saying things that I might like celebrating Madlib, or saying things that I'm not into, like the aforementioned line about people overdosing or bragging about investing in crypto, I don't feel like I'm being preached at as much as I was on Logic records before. I don't feel like I'm listening to Logic say, here is the answer, here is the great message that I have to put forth because I am a great messenger and a great artist. It's instead like Logic saying, this is my thoughts, this is my life experience, and I can get with that. I think that's cool. At least for that, from that aspect. That's because Vinyl Days sees Logic allow himself to be more vulnerable and imperfect, and instead of centering himself as a hero with an all-important message, which often fell well short of expectations, he simply records himself. He simply allows himself to forgive himself and to like himself and to try what he wants to try. He's centered in the album as a human being that you're witnessing and you're listening to, whether or not you like him. He's still bragging on most of these tracks, but it's more out of a sense of having fun and loving hip-hop. He's more focused on what he enjoys instead of focused on how to make other people enjoy him. And it's not perfect, but I do think it's a change for the better. A logical one. That fucking music outside derailed this beautiful culminating line that I had to finish this essay. It's Drake too. It's Drake. Logic, have a good day. If you like my YouTube videos, whoever it is that you are, hit like, comment, subscribe, watch my other videos. They're not about Logic. They're about other stuff. I have a video about Frank Ocean. I have a video about Bo Burnham. I have a video about Utara Hikaru that a lot of people are sleeping on. If you want to donate and help me buy a new phone to record on, help me set up things, you can donate to my Ko-Fi in the description. Buy me a little coffee. Let me know what you think about Logic and about the video, and let me know what you'd like me to cover next, and I'll see you around. Thanks for watching. Bye. Peace, love, and positivity.